Now, the situation in the Central African Republic remains tense and uncertain. The country's interim President Catherine Samba-Panza returned home on Wednesday after leaving the UN General Assembly in New York early in response to the worst violence this year to hit the capital, Bangui. People have been rallying on the streets of Bangui, calling for the restoration of Central African Republic's national army. The army was sidelined after mostly Muslim Seleka rebels seized power in the mostly Christian country in 2013. Seleka stepped aside the following year under pressure from the United Nations and its former colonial ruler France, clearing the way for an interim government led by President Catherine Samba-Panza. Now, for more news and notes on the situations in Syria and the Central African Republic, VOA UN correspondent Margaret Besheer joins us live from the UN in New York. Margaret, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vincent.
Yes, now we started off with Syria. The Russians are very adamant that they are only targeting the ISIS positions. Why is nobody believing them?
Well, the Syrian National Coalition president was here yesterday at the UN, and he said that they're hitting Hama, which was freed of ISIL over a year ago. That area was liberated, and Homs, and also they've been hitting Hama, and so they're saying these are areas where ISIL isn't present. So how, by deduction, how can they be hitting ISIL? But as you said, the Russians say that they're going after ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra.
Now, from what you're hearing around the UN, is this going to be possibly the beginning of a serious conflict or disagreement of those that are involved, all the countries that are involved in the fight against extremism in that region?
Well, I think there's concern because the Russian entry into this arena, into this area, is an escalation. You have a major military superpower coming into the conflict in Syria when everybody is trying to move it towards political talks. So there's a little concern over that. But the U.S. and the Russian foreign ministers, Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov, have met 3 times this week here in New York. They're on top of the situation, trying to keep communication open between the two superpowers. Minister Lavrov and Mr. Kerry met again last night, and Kerry said that the two countries would have military-to-military discussions very soon. We hear that they're happening today, some sort of a video conference between American and Russian military personnel.
All right, now let's move over to the other issue, that is Central African Republic, which looks like it is sliding back to chaos. What has been happening around the UN in relation to the CAR?
Yeah, it's a terrible setback for the CAR. They're so close to the end of the transition period this year. As you mentioned, the president flew back early from the General Assembly. Today, there was a special session on CAR, which had been planned prior to this. It wasn't because of this. The Secretary General chaired the meeting. It's a donors conference and discussion of the situation, and he expressed his deep concern that this could derail the political process, and he urged restraint by all parties, and he called for a halt to what he called this unacceptable violence that was triggered, as you know, by the killing of a young Muslim taxi driver. So the SG, the Secretary General, urged everyone to recommit to the process in CAR to help with the elections that are coming up. There's a huge funding gap, as always. We're seeing at the UN constant funding gaps. For the CAR, they need $200 million for urgent programs and priorities. They only have about 100 million, a little over 100 million of that. So they were encouraging donors today to try and make that up, particularly on the election process. They want the elections to happen on time.
Very quickly, the interim government there is saying it needs more help from the UN. Is that the kind of help they're asking for, funding?
Right, so they're asking for technical funding, election funding, humanitarian aid. More than half the country is receiving humanitarian assistance. So it's a variety of things, also for demobilization and disarmament type programs, security sector reform, justice and reconciliation. These are all the areas that need to be funded. So donors were meeting today, so hopefully we'll hear some good news later in the day.
And you'll tell us more about that tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Margaret. VOA's UN correspondent Margaret Besheer reporting live from New York.